This is a Chevrolet Camaro from the early 1990s. Under the hood, a classic V8, a true performance car of its era. And this is a Toyota Prius from 2017, a hybrid, efficient, quiet, a car built for everyday life. But there is something strange. Visually, these cars seem to have switched roles. The old Camaro looks calmer than many modern city cars, while the Prius, and cars like it, try to look angry, aggressive, and dangerous, as if we somehow missed the beginning of an invasion. And these alien shapes are now rolling off assembly lines around the world. So when did ordinary cars turn into aggressive Decepticons? And why did this even happen? Today we're going to find out. For most of the 20th century, a car's appearance was a direct continuation of its engineering. Design did not try to play a separate role. It simply explained what the car was and what it was built for. Family sedans looked calm and restrained. City cars were simple and compact, and sports models could be expressive without being aggressive. Many coupes and muscle cars of that era were elegant rather than angry. Their proportions, stance, and body lines communicated character without trying to force an emotional reaction. Aggression in design did appear from time to time, but it was usually an experiment, not a mass trend. In the 1950s, aviation-inspired styling dominated. In the 1960s, modernism took over. The 1970s brought angular shapes, and in the 1980s, aerodynamics became the priority. Design evolved gradually and logically. Each decade added something of its own. Everything followed a natural course, and it seemed like it would always be this way. But the real problem came from a direction no one expected. By the 1990s, the automotive market had entered a rather paradoxical situation. Cars had become reliable and largely free of inherent defects, and the phrase, "turn the key and drive," had become the norm for almost every vehicle. But at the same time, most models were becoming technically very similar to one another. Platforms were standardized, engines became more uniform, and increasingly strict safety and environmental regulations limited engineers. As a result, the differences between models gradually disappeared. Two sedans from different brands could have almost identical engines, suspensions, transmissions, and levels of comfort. From a technical point of view, they were becoming less and less unique. The same thing was happening with design. Cars were starting to look more and more alike. And let's be honest, the 1990s were probably not the most successful period in automotive design history. As a result, manufacturers faced a real problem: how to make their cars stand out among dozens of similar models. And the marketer's answer was quite simple: through appearance. From that moment on, design stopped being a direct continuation of engineering. It took on a new role, attracting attention in dense traffic and creating an emotional reaction in the buyer. When automakers realized that an aggressive appearance really influenced perception and sales, this approach quickly stopped being an experiment and became the norm. Some of the first mass-market examples were the 10th generation Mitsubishi Lancer and the Honda Civic hatchback. Today, their design may seem quite calm and even friendly, but at the time it looked bold and dynamic. And this aggression worked extremely well for sales. The main audience was young buyers, those who dreamed of a real Lancer Evo but could only afford the base version. Visually, even the standard Lancer gave the feeling of something sporty, something almost like the real thing. Over time, this led to a simple pattern. Calm, neutral design began to be associated with outdated or cheap models, while more aggressive styling became linked to progress and modernity. From that point on, aggression became the dominant design language. Manufacturers became cautious. No one wanted to take risks and release a car that looked too calm next to its competitors. It was much easier to make another version with sharp headlights and a massive grille than to explain to the market why your design was different. Gradually, this approach became firmly established. Aggressive styling stopped being a conscious choice and turned into a safe standard, just like simplicity and neutrality had once been the standard. An interesting fact: in 1990, while developing the fourth generation Mustang, Ford created three concept cars called Rambo, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Bruce Jenner, depending on their level of visual aggression. At the time, the Rambo version was rejected for being too extreme. It seems that about 20 years later, those ideas finally found their audience. More and more everyday cars began to look like transformers, and perhaps no company went further in this direction than Toyota. Let me be clear. I'm not against aggressive design in principle, and I don't think every car should look like a panda, but everything has its place and its limits. One thing is a Forerunner with its brutal, tough image, and something completely different is a Yaris. When a small city hatchback tries to look like a battle robot, it starts to feel strange. Prius and Mirai, of course, can't be called ugly, but if there were a competition for the biggest mismatch between design and technical purpose, they would probably take the top two places. To understand why aggressive design works, you have to look not only at cars, but also at the people who buy them. For most drivers, a car is not just transportation. It is personal space and a way to feel more confident. Modern cities are a constant source of stress. Traffic jams, heavy congestion, pressure from work. Behind the wheel, people often feel vulnerable and dependent on others. In this environment, a car's appearance begins to play a psychological role. A large grille, narrow headlights, sharp lines, all of this is subconsciously perceived as a sign of strength. Even with an ordinary engine, the car seems to say, "Don't mess with me." Design creates an illusion of control and protection. In essence, a modern car becomes psychological armor. That is why aggressive styling sells so well. People buy it for the feeling of confidence it provides. Automotive journalists and bloggers have played a major role in shaping this kind of design. And I'm not talking about Toyota specifically, but about the entire industry. I'm sure you've often seen or read how strict and conservative design is described as boring and outdated. For example, I've seen this many times in reviews of the Land Cruiser 200. Some journalists felt it lacked expression, so they labeled it as a car for retirees and something morally outdated. In general, in my opinion, automotive journalism has created quite a few problems for the industry. For instance, almost every car is expected to be fun to drive and have a sporty character. As a result, manufacturers make suspensions stiffer, seats harder, and reduce sound insulation, so you can hear the engine better. And then they explain, "You wanted sportiness. Here it is." Even though in real life, most people don't need sportiness. They need comfort. At the same time, it seems that the fashion for aggressive design is slowly starting to fade. More and more cars are appearing with a neo-retro style, and in 2024, Volkswagen even stated that it no longer wants its cars to look angry. But it's probably too early to celebrate, because instead of aggression, we're now getting cars with some kind of apathetic, tired-looking faces. When I first saw the new Fiat 500, it reminded me of my neighbor who's exhausted by life and goes out on the porch for a cigarette just to escape his wife's yelling. So in the end, this turned into an episode where I complained a lot and talked about how things used to be better. But in any case, share your opinion in the comments, what you agree with and what you don't. I think it will be interesting to discuss.